There's a Certain Slant of Light by Emily Dickinson, poem 258. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any. 'Tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. To first paraphrase the poem, we see that there is a particular ray of illumination that comes late in the winter season, and it's like a heavy burden that we feel when we hear church music. Heaven hurts us with this ray of light, but not on our skin, rather inside of us, in our hearts and in our minds. No one can teach us how bad this is. It's a feeling of total gloom and despair. Some see it as a royal disease full of anguish and sickness that's delivered to us through the air. When it arrives, the world stands still and even the shadows become afraid. When it leaves, it's like the blank stare on a dead person's face. There is something that comes in our old age that is similar to the heavy burden we feel in our hearts when we hear funeral music. This heavy feeling that Dickinson's speaker talks of can actually be related back to how Dickinson feels about the church. She was never very fond of the church and all the ideals that came with it. And here we can see that neither does her speaker. The oppression is that something is coming from the sounds of the cathedral tunes that literally causes the speaker to feel this heavy weight. However, we find out that this weight isn't actually a weight, but a feeling of heartache inside of this person. We also see that this can actually be seen as a curse sent from God in heaven, and it does not actually physically hurt us, but rather mentally and like a heartache. The hurt that is sent doesn't actually afflict pain, but we still do feel the pain inside of us, whether that be guilt or hurt, because we seem to be oppressed by God rather than freed by Him. The speaker here seems to emulate Dickinson's views of the church more and more because she has been known to feel oppression by the church and feels more free when she's further from it. And this isn't to say that Dickinson didn't have faith, because we do know from looking at her life that she was a faithful woman. However, she didn't feel that church was necessarily an outlet for her faith. She was very secluded in her life, and this definitely emulates that way that she lived her life. Here we see that no one can teach us or tell us how awful this total despair is, because it is an illness that is supposedly airborne that God has sent to us. We see that there's no real preparation for this feeling. It's not like an illness, and that there's no way to escape receiving this virus. The virus, however, is not one that causes a sickness, but sin. It can be said that some people from the church in those times actually believed that if you continually spend more time around people who sin, that you will end up sinning. It's kind of like today, it's like being guilty by association. And that's what I actually believe Dickinson's speaker is trying to convey. This virus, obviously no one wants to catch it because they believe that if they catch it, they'll become sinners, just like those who, quote, have the virus. And it's definitely reminiscent of the, witch hunts. If you spend time with a witch, then you must be a witch as well, and things like that. And that's sort of how I think Dickinson feels with the church, is that they actually shun people who sin rather than bring them in to help them not become sinners. And that's what I think her speaker is trying to say, that this sort of disease is that's being sent around. And here, this is so horrible that the earth and even non-living things fear it, but it doesn't care about us. It just does its damage, turns away, and moves on. Dickinson's speaker shows stillness in this last stanza and allows the reader to believe that this sickness is coming, and people have stopped to just hold their breath in hopes of not catching whatever it is. And as it passes in the shadows, it just looks on death. Some people have actually said that this poem is talking about the plague and how no one could escape it. Even in the beginning, the, quote, cathedral tunes couldn't banish the disease, how many thought bringing in a priest to pray over the sick ones would actually help them get rid of the plague, but in turn obviously didn't. And in the second stanza, it lends itself to show how it is dealing with people who are dying and who we know could be going to heaven, but still we feel this pain that lingers within us. And I think that this idea that it's about the plague is definitely a very literal meaning of this poem and doesn't really capture the essence of Dickinson. Rather, it just looks at the words and relates it, and I think it relates well to the ideas of the plague. However, I don't actually agree, because I think this is more about Dickinson's view of the church and view of how the church seems to oppress people, and even the rules within the church oppress people, and how they believe that you should be living your life oppresses people, because those people who even may not be sinning in a way are seen as sinning because they are doing something that disagrees with what the church is telling them to do. And this is the weight that Dickinson is feeling. This is the heavy burden that she's feeling from the church, and that she sees when she sees this land of light. This rest of this poem is just a metaphor that she sees this light in the winter afternoon. And she sees that and decides that, it's very reminiscent of how the church has made her feel. Winter's afternoon, cold, it's starting to get colder, the sun goes down, and that's sort of this weight that she's starting to feel when she hears the cathedral tunes.